All right. So one of my more favorite things to do, I guess, is supply and demand shifts with the animations. Now, I think this is super helpful because when explaining supply and demand shifts, I think it's beneficial for the students to really be able to visualize where we're starting and then where we end up. And that's why I think being able to add in the animations to show that is helpful for them. And what I want to show today is that there are two ways to do this. There is an incredibly easy way, and there's one that's slightly harder, but I think it's more visually appealing. And so we're going to start again with our supply and demand graph, and I'm actually going to remove all these animations that I've already got in here, because the only animation we're going to worry about is, let's suppose that there's a shift of one of our curves. So let's just suppose that there's a shift of our demand curve. So like I said, there's an easy way to do this, and there's a slightly more difficult but a fun way to do it as well. So I'm going to start with the easy way first, which is just the a new curve appearing. And so here's what we're going to do is we're going to take this, we're going to take this demand curve, we're going to duplicate it. And so we're going to have another one of these. And because it still has that same fixed aspect ratio, it is going to have the same, it's going to be parallel and everything, same slope. But I do want to resize it a little bit, because if, say, I'm shifting out to right here, I don't want it being this big. So I'm going to bring this one in a little. I'll probably bring that into here. I'll bring this into here. So that's the size of my new demand curve I'm going to end up with, just to kind of illustrate that. And again, you can make it bigger if you want. I'm just doing it for simplicity's sake. And then I'm also, since this is going to be my second demand curve, I'm going to duplicate this label too. I'm going to come up here, and I'm going to make that say D2 right there. A few other things I want to do with this is, obviously I'm going to have a new equilibrium. And so what rather than recreate everything, I'm just going to take this, I'm going to hold shift, take that, hold shift, click my equilibrium, click this line, click this line. I'm going to press Control, you can do copy and paste or Control D. The nice thing about doing it this way is it's gonna replicate all of those animations if you have them. I deleted mine, so I'm gonna remake those. But if you're duplicating things that already have animations, it'll duplicate those animations too. Now, what we're gonna do is I'm gonna pull this over to here, make sure those align. This is gonna be P2 at my second equilibrium. I'm gonna stretch this line over a little bit. I'm going to bring this Q1 down and make sure this now says Q2. I'm also going to bring down my dotted line here. And so visually, this looks pretty good. One other thing I want to do is I'm going to add in an arrow. And so I'm going to take a shape. There's two different arrows that I think are good ones you can use. There's just a simple arrow here, or there's a block arrow. I typically use the simple arrow, and then I just kind of make it a little thicker. So I'll take this and I'll format this arrow. I'll bring up the thickness quite a bit bigger. Sometimes what I'll even do is I'll add some transparency to it just to make it a little less distracting, right? Still showing that arrow movement. You can even change the, how you want it to look. If I want to have an arrow that looks like that, a little more rounded with everything else, if I want to make sure that the ends of it are rounded, whatever. Like, those are all things you got available to you. If you want to use a block arrow, that's also possible too. So, all right. So let's suppose I've got this. Now I want to animate this because I don't want it to just pop up and my students see this. I want to be able to talk through some supply and demand stuff and then show this. So here's the way that we are going to do that. First and foremost, I'm gonna take you through the easy way. So the easy way, what we're going to do is we're going to take this arrow, and that's going to be the first thing that I get animated. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to animations, and I'm going to wipe this from left to right. And so I'm going to click wipe. It's going to go from left to right. I'm going to take that out to a second, just so that it shows like, hey, we're shifting this thing over to the right. Then from there, I'm going to click this demand curve, and just like we did with the animations in the last video, I'm also going to wipe that. I'm going to wipe it from left to right to show that downward kind of drawing motion. I'm going to bump this again up to, I'll take it to a second, and then I'm going to click this label, and I'm going to have that fade in. And so far in my animation pane, I have those three animations. I do want the demand. Actually, I want these to show up one after another. So I want it to show the arrow. And as soon as the arrow is done being drawn, I want the demand curve to show up. And once the demand curve shows up, I want the label to show up. So what I can actually do is highlight both of these. And I'm going to click after previous for both of those. And so first this one will go, then the next one, then the next one, right? And so if I was to show you my animations, it would be first the arrow, then the demand curve, then the label. And so those all show up just like we want them to show up. Then from there, what I can do is I can do the same thing with, I can make my my equilibrium fade in. I can have my price axis wipe in from the right over the course of 1.25 seconds. I can have this. Ooh, I want this to pop up too. Can't forget about that label. And I want that label to show up after previous. Want to take this. I'm going to have this wipe in from the top for 1.25 seconds, and then have my quantity label fade in as well, and I want that to fade in after previous. I think that's everything we need. So let's go ahead and let's test it. So yeah, cool. We got our supply and demand graph looking right there. And maybe we want to show up because we're just going to kind of review some stuff about supply and demand. We're going to say, well, what happens if there's a shift of demand? Let's say demand shifts to the right. And so we have our arrow drawn with our new demand curve showing up, D2. And we say, all right, great. Well, let's identify our new equilibrium. Well, our new equilibrium is right there. Once our new equilibrium shows up right there, we say, okay, well, we go over here and it lines up with our price axis there. It shows up with our quantity axis there. Sweet. We just showed a shift of demand with these animations. And again, like I said, what's really nice is we have this starting point right here. It's not overwhelming, not distracting, and then we can do it step by step for our students so they can see when things show up. We can, talk here like, oh, what happened to our price? Or go here, what happened to our quantity? We can take those in steps to make it a little bit easier so that they're not overwhelmed by too much all at once. Now, I'd say that's the easy way, and if you notice, you're probably like, that's the easy way, and it suffices. It does what I need it to. Great. I don't know, like I'm a sucker for oohs and ahs when it comes to my animations. And so the other one that you can do is a movement animation. So this one's a little trickier. What we're going to do is I'm going to take this curve because all the other animations is pretty well going to stay the same. I'm going to take this and I'm going to move it, and it is going to align, oh boy, right there. All right. So if you notice, like you can't really even see that it's there. It's hidden with the other line. Now, the one place you can see it is right there because it sits on top of that old equilibrium. Simple solution to that, I'm just going to click that oval. I'm going to right click it and I'm going to bring it to the front. So boom, now you don't even notice that it's there. All right. So this is our starting point. What we can then do is, and this is where it gets a little tricky. So I'm going to click that, and I know that I'm clicking the smaller demand curve, and I know that because if you notice the green nodes, yeah, it starts up here, but it ends about halfway down. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go up here, and I am going to go to path animation. So that's this one that looks like a little squiggly line. Path animation, and it's just going to move in a straight line. And so I'm going to click draw line. Now, if you notice, it moves in a straight line. Now, I messed up with this. So what you can actually do is, I forgot that I drew that one in. They actually have ones that default for you. So if I click that and click path animation, rather than I click the custom draw line, I want to go here just a straight up line. Because the nice thing about that is that I don't got to draw it. They already did it for me. So draw that. Now, the way it defaults to is actually down. And so what I want to do is I want to change this to effect options. And I want it to go not down, but I want it to go right. All right. Another thing I want to do is I also want to come here and I want to go to origin locked. The reason I want to go origin locked is because I want it to start like at that point, no matter what. All right, this is where then we kind of adjust it, right? So I don't want it to go that far out. So what I can do is I can grab this red node and I can bring it back. And then this is where you got to kind of eyeball it. It's like, where do I want it to end up? And you're like, yeah, that's about where I want it to end up. Now, if you notice, you can't really tell. I think mine's going slightly less than straight. There we go. Nope, I'm going to even bring it back a little bit more. I'd say that looks pretty good. From the eyeball test, I think that looks pretty good. Now, if you notice over here, though, and this is where things get a little tricky, because right here, this shows that straight connector being at the very end. So right now, the way it's set up, that demand curve shift won't happen until the very, very, very end, and I don't want that. I want it to show up way up here. All right. Now this is where it gets a little tricky, because if you notice right now, 2 right here is the shift of that line, and then below it is the line showing up, straight connector 37, because that's what it did before. So I'm going to take this one, I'm going to delete it, because I want it to already be there. It's already there. It's just hiding, if you remember. So right now, I have what happens in order of these animations is I have the arrow show up right there. Then I have that line slide on over to the right. Then I have my label show up. I'm actually going to shift my label over a little. And then everything's fine from there. Now, the one thing that I do a little bit different here is I actually have that straight arrow show up afterward, because the kids can visually see the movement to the right, right? Like they can, since it is shifting, I don't need to have the arrow first to show that shift to the right, because the animation is showing the movement to the right. So what I actually do is I just switch spots of these two, and so I just drag that one down. So now the first thing that'll happen is that line will slide to the right. Then from there, the arrow, meaning this blue arrow right here, will show up, and then the label. I kind of want to just rearrange those because I want that arrow to show up immediately after that shift, so I'll put after previous. And then I want this D2, like the label. I know it shows after previous. I actually want that to say with previous. And this is kind of where it gets a little confusing, but it makes sense. We want this to slide over, right? We want the demand curve to slide to the right. Then we want that arrow to show up after it slides, after the demand curve slides right. But we also want the label to show up with the arrow showing up that shows up after the shift to the right, if that all makes sense. But then everything else is going to be the same on here. So let's go ahead and let's check our animations. So again, nothing here. This is where the oohs and ahs come in from the students. You click for the first time and boom, look, our demand curve slides over to the right. And we're saying, hey, like that's that animation right there is showing that shift to the right of the demand curve. Then you can show your equilibrium, show and line up with the axes. Like I said, this is the way of doing it where it's like, okay, that seems like a little bit of an overkill. I'm a big time overkill person when it comes to my animations, and so I enjoy those shifts. You can also do it, obviously same way with your supply curves or whatever it might be, or any other curves. You can use that animation to get things to slide around, and it's, like I said, it's really kind of fun to do. But if that first easy way suffices for you, you're like, hey, this is good, do that one. I do that one sometimes when I'm not in the mood to draw all the shifts and things. But yeah, it works out just great. But again, I think using that gradual reveal with those animations is super beneficial for the students to see what exactly, like what manipulations, what changes are actually happening to the graph without seeing it just pop up there all at once.